Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching. And GT, the Thranic prison pods came down, burning through Vulkaris' atmosphere. 11 of them. Black iron eggs trailing fire through. Sky the color of old bruises. The ash storm ate the light. Wind screamed against the hulls. Inside Pod 7, restraints bit into 40 bodies and held them upright through the shaking. Inside Pod 7, Sergeant Idris. Calloway counted breaths slowly, in, out. Across from him, an alien with too many joints thrashed against its harness and shrieked in a language nobody answered. Beside it, a hulking gray-skinned prisoner pressed both palms flat to the bulkhead and prayed to a wall that didn't care. The pod bucked, dropped, bucked again. To Calloway's left, Sergeant Lucas. Brant rode the chaos loose-limbed, head back against the iron. Warrant Officer Yusuf Adami had his eyes shut, while Corporal Merk Davik, the team's medic, kept one hand on Private Nico Hale's harness. Hale was breathing too fast. Davik tapped twice on his chest. Slow down. Hale did. Pod 9 went out. The view slit in a flash of white, its heat shielding peeled away at 60,000 FT. The hole lit like a struck match for half a second. The slit showed it clearly, a glowing coal full of bodies, and then it broke apart and the wind took the pieces. 40 prisoners gone before the ground. The gray alien stopped praying. Brace, Calloway said. Pod 7 hit the ground. The world ended and started again. Iron screamed across rock. The harness tried to cut Calloway in half and didn't. Sparks, a grinding skid that went on too long. Then stillness and the ticking of stressed metal and the sound of breathing inside the pod. The team did not move. They listened. Wind, the far concussion of other pods. Landing. Brant looked at Calloway. Calloway nodded once. They moved. The seal release groaned. Ash poured in around the edges before. The door was halfway down, fine and gray, and warm as breath from an oven. The light outside was no light at all. Just a dim furnace glow filtered through. A sky that never opened. Heat came in like a hand. It pressed on the chest. It found every gap in a suit and leaned 40 FT away. A prisoner staggered out of Pod 6. A tall reptile thing in light prison. Weave and made it 9 steps before it. Simply stopped, swayed, and folded down into the ash. No wound. No sound. It cooked standing up and lay down to finish. Sealed, Calloway said. Check seals. 5 hands went to 5 collars. 5 clicks. The suits held. The gray prisoner from their pod tore at its own collar. Choking, it got the seal open and dragged in a full breath of Vulkaris air. It died on the exhale. The air did it in seconds. The gray thing clotted its throat, foam at the seams of its mouth, eyes flooding red, and went down beside the pod, thrashing and then not thrashing. Dovich looked away. Hale watched until the body stopped moving. Don't open your seal, Calloway said to all of them. Not for anything. Copy, Hale said. They went through Pod 7 first, then the wreck of Pod 6, stripped the dead of water cells, ration bricks intact, filter cartridges. The work was ugly and fast, and nobody spoke during it. Adami found a hand scanner with a cracked screen and pocketed it. Brant found a length of cable and looped it over his shoulder. Calloway kept his eyes moving, his people at their work, the horizon. The heat shimmer turning the dead reptile into a mirage. Sweat sheeted down his spine inside the suit. His hands ached from the landing. Every breath through the filter tasted of sulfur and char. The team moved through it anyway, low and economical. Nobody intended to stop. Stopping meant dying. Around them, across the black plain, the others were learning Vulkaris. A cluster of small prisoners had pried open Pod 3 and built a shade with a hull panel. Smart. Not enough. 2 of them were already down. A lone survivor from Pod 10 wandered the open ground in circles, suit fans whining, looking for something that wasn't there. Sergeant Adami kept his voice low. He had the crack scanner up, sweeping it in a slow arc. Ground's wrong west of us. Wrong how? Hot. Hotter than it should be. Reed's thin. He lowered it. I wouldn't walk it. Calloway looked west. The ash there lay smooth and pale and inviting. The flattest ground in sight. Nobody walks it, he said. Less than 5 minutes later, the storm arrived from the west. A black wall of ash and grit stretched across the horizon, driven ahead by winds that reached them before the cloud itself. The temperature did a strange thing, dropping and spiking at once while the dim furnace light vanished behind the advancing front. Down, Calloway said, rope up now. Brant's cable came off his shoulder. One by one, the team clipped themselves to the wreck of Pod 7 and dropped into its lee, backs against the iron hull. Adami secured the salvaged supplies before taking cover. The lone survivor from Pod 10 saw them. It ran for the shelter. It was 30 ft out when the storm took it. The wind hit like a struck thing, and the prisoner went off its feet sideways. It tumbled. Its seal tore on the second roll, and the storm poured Vulkaris into it, ash and poison both. And what came out of the cloud where it had been was already not moving. The grit scoured. Within a minute the shape was a low mound, and then it was nothing, just ground. Inside the cloud, the world was a roar. Calloway felt the rope across his ribs, and the hull at his back shuddering as the storm tried to move 3 tons of crashed iron. Visibility was a forearm's length. He kept one hand on the cable and read his people by feel. Brant, Adami, Dovich, Hale, 4. The ground moved, not the wind. The ground. A long, slow tilt, a sound under the storm sound, deep and grinding. Then somewhere off to Calloway's left, where the small prisoners had built their shade, the crust gave way. The whole flat sheet of it dropped 6 ft. At once, then tipped, then went. And the pod and the panel and the survivors slid down into a fissure that breathed orange light from somewhere far below. The scream lasted as long as the falling did. Then the crust slammed shut over it like a mouth. Hale shouted something. The storm swallowed the words. Nobody moved. They stayed anchored to the wreck for 2 hours while Vulkaris tried to scrub them off its skin. The storm passed the way it came. Sudden, the roar fell off to moan, and then to wind, and then the furnace light bled back through the ash, and the team unfolded from the wreck of Pod 7. Stiff, scoured, alive. The plane had changed. where there had been 11 pods and the survivors of them. Now there was a graveyard. The fissure to the south had sealed over. Flat, no sign anyone had stood there. Pod 3's shade camp was gone. The wandering survivor was gone. Mounds lay where the storm had caught. Things in the open, half-buried suit. Fans still turning on a few of them. Slowing, stopping. Calloway took the tally nobody asked for. Of everything that had come down in 11 pods, only 5 moving shapes remained. On the plane, Calloway and the 4 men who had landed. With him, everything else that had walked off the drop was under the ash or down the throat of the world. "Check in," he said. "Up," said Brandt. "Up," said Adami. "Up," said Dovich. "Up," said Hale. Nobody hurt. 5 seals held, 5 filters working. 5 suits holding against a world that had killed everything else in a single afternoon. Dovich crouched by one of the half-buried mounts, brushed ash from a faceplate. The reptile thing from Pod 6 carried. Here by the storm. He checked it the way a medic checks. 2 fingers, a held breath. He stood. Nothing left to do for any of them, he said. Adami had the cracked scanner out. Again working the horizon, the screen flickered. He frowned at it. "Sergeant, temps climbing." He tilted the scanner east where the storm had gone. "And there's another front behind that. One bigger." Calloway looked at the salvage piled against the hull, 3 water cells, a handful of ration bricks, filter cartridges that would last days, not weeks. Suits already gray with grit, gaskets already chewing on Vulkaris ash. He looked at the smooth pale ground to the west that Adami had said would kill them. He looked at the sky that never opened, and the heat shimmer rising off a plain of the dead. No ship overhead, no signal. No line out. Just the planet. And the next storm coming. And 5 men in failing suits standing. In a field of everything Vulkaris had already taken. "Pack the salvage," Calloway said. "We move before that front lands." Brandt slung the cable. Adami killed the scanner to save it. Hale looked once more at the mounds in the ash, said nothing, and shouldered a water cell. They started walking. 5 shapes on a dead plain, small under a bruised sky. The second storm building black behind them, and the ground hot and thin and waiting. Vulkaris had eaten everyone else in an afternoon. It had not finished yet. The 5 men kept moving across the ash plain, while the second storm gathered behind them. Vulkaris had done everything it was supposed to do. It had burned, poisoned, buried, and killed every other prisoner dropped onto its surface. Yet the humans were still walking. The truth was that none of them had come here expecting anything different. It did not begin here. It began in General Rennick's office, long way from any death world, where he watched the recording of a pirate's interrogation while the officers conducting the debrief laughed at the prisoner's story. 6 months ago, the recording was 9 months old by the time it reached General Aldrich Rennick's desk. It showed a smuggler strapped to an interrogation chair, a lean, scarred thing plated gray. One of the countless labor species the Thranic Imperium moved through its worlds by the millions and discarded just as easily. It had been pulled half dead from a drifting wreck 3 sectors from any shipping lane, dehydrated past sense, and the first words anyone recorded from It had not been a location or a cargo. Manifest. It had been the name of a planet. Vulkaris, the smuggler said on the screen, and the word came out like something it had been carried too long. I walked off Vulkaris. Nobody walks off Vulkaris. The Imperium doesn't imprison people. There, it sentences them there. Prisoners are dropped to the surface, and the planet carries out the execution. No guards. No walls. No cells. 4 centuries of recorded drops and not one confirmed survivor. The voice that spoke belonged to the officer conducting the interview. Rennick sat alone in his office and watched. The recording carried no official markings. Whatever government had questioned the survivor had stripped them before the file entered the black market. By the time it reached Rennick's desk, it had passed through too many hands to trace. That did not concern him. Sometimes the black market sold lies. Sometimes it sold jewels. The officer leaned forward. Every species knows what Vulkaris means. It is where the Imperium sends those it wants erased. On the screen, the smuggler pulled against its restraints until they creaked. I survived 72 days on Vulkaris, long enough to learn there's a band around the middle of the world. Every cycle the heat drops, not cool, not comfortable, survivable. The storm's thin, the air drops just below killing. You get the right gear, you get hard. Before you go down, you keep your seals shut, and you don't trust the smooth ground. You live through the window. I scavenged what I could from the drop pods and the dead. Filters, batteries, seals, anything that still worked. Missed the window. And Vulkaris kills you like it kills everyone else. It bared a row of broken teeth. I lived through it. 41 of us went down. I'm the only one who came back. The investigator waited. The heat took some the first hour. The air took the ones who panicked. The ground ate a whole shelter while they slept on it. The storm scoured the rest down to nothing. It stopped. They all died afraid of the planet. I stopped being afraid of it and started using it. That's the whole truth. There isn't another one. The officer folded his arms. Then explain how you are sitting in this chair. The smuggler laughed, a dry sound scraped out of a ruined throat. You think everyone goes down in pods? As far as we know, not all. It shifted against the restraints. Sometimes they bring prisoners down themselves. Officers, people who want to watch. The interrogator's expression hardened. Watch what? The dying. The smuggler shrugged as much as they restraints allowed. Some make wagers, some just want to see if the stories are true. Vulkaris attracts a certain kind of curiosity. Silence settled over the room. So I waited. For what? For one of them to land. The smuggler's broken smile returned. Eventually, one did. And then, I killed the Thran who came down to watch the prisoners being dumped, and then I made the pilot fly me off the planet. A few voices laughed somewhere behind the camera. The smuggler waited for them to stop. My species learns visually, it said. Show us a thing one time, and we remember it exactly, every motion, every sequence. The laughter faded. I watched him fly. You watched him fly once. Once it was enough. The smuggler leaned forward until the restraints creaked. By the time we reached orbit, he was dead, and I was piloting the ship. before the other Thren ship noticed. Anything. I jumped into FTL and escaped. The interrogator stared at him. You expect us to believe you flew it into orbit? I did fly it into orbit. And the escort ships let you escape that easily. They never expected a prisoner to leave the surface. By the time they realized something was wrong, I was already gone. His smile disappeared. The jump damaged the ship. The reactor failed later. I drifted until I crashed. And then your people found me. The interrogator looked unconvinced. Convenient. Believe whatever you like. The smuggler settled back into the chair. I walked off Vulkaris. That's the only part that matters. The recording ended. Rennick sat for a long time without moving. Then he compiled his assessment and forwarded both the testimony and his conclusions to the officers responsible for strategic planning and military readiness. He made no claim that the survivor was telling the truth. The evidence was too thin for that. What concerned him was that the account was plausible. If the smuggler had lied, the cost of being wrong would be a modest training budget and 6 months of preparation. That would never be needed. If the smuggler had told the truth, the cost of doing nothing could someday be measured in human lives. The argument proved sufficient, and 2 weeks later, authorization arrived for a 6-month training program. Rennick started taking people. General Rennick ignored service records. His first selection placed 40 volunteers inside a sealed heat chamber, told them nothing about its purpose, and slowly turned the temperature up. A third asked out before the first hour. He thanked them and sent them back to their units with their files untouched. More followed as the chamber climbed. Rennick kept raising the heat until the medics physically intervened. 9 remained. Of those 9, only 5 had stopped treating the heat as an enemy. Calloway sat against the wall with his eyes closed, breathing on account, while larger men hammered the hatch and demanded release. Brant grinned through the misery, as though the chamber had shared a private joke. Adami spent his time studying the vents, learning the machine that was trying to cook him. Davich watched the others instead of himself and predicted 2 collapses before they happened. Hale, the youngest by years, matched Calloway breath for breath and never once looked at the door. Rennick kept those 5 and built the program around them. 6 months was enough. Rennick's program rested on a simple assumption. Anyone sent to Vulkaris would survive or die by discipline long before strength mattered. The trainees learned to live inside sealed suits. They slept in them, ate through them, worked in them until the equipment stopped feeling worn and started feeling permanent. They learned how to stretch a dying filter, nurse a failing seal, and keep damaged gear functioning long after it should have failed. The atmosphere chambers came next. Filters covered their faces while instructors recreated the conditions described in the survivor's testimony. One lesson was drilled into them until it became instinct. Never break your seal. Not because the air looked safe. Not because it felt safe. Not because panic insisted otherwise. The ground was no kinder. Rennick built training ranges designed to mimic Vulkaris with smooth crust, hiding unstable hollows beneath. The recruits learned quickly that the terrain punished confidence and rewarded caution. They learned to move ropes together, trust procedures over instinct, and Assume every easy path concealed a problem. The purpose of the training was never explained. Rennick cared only that they learned to remain calm when conditions turned hostile and equipment began to fail. By the end of 6 months they were patient, methodical, and extremely difficult to kill. The final exercise sealed them inside the harshest environment Rennick could create for 48 continuous hours. Heat climbed without warning, equipment failures appeared by design, filters clogged, seals failed. The trainees adapted. They redistributed resources, repaired damaged gear, established rest rotations without instruction, and emerged from the chamber functioning as a unit rather than a collection of individuals. Only then did Rennick meet them. He told them the mission they had trained for might never come. If it did, they would likely be the only humans prepared to face it. Then he returned them to ordinary assignments and waited for the Empire's frontier to reach humanity. It took just under 1 year. Then the Thranic Imperium struck a human mining colony and claimed it as a victory. Fortunately, the settlement's population had always been small. Most of the heavy labor was performed by automated systems. The majority of the colonists escaped before the occupation was complete, and the casualties remained mercifully low. Not long afterward, a human cargo hauler loaded with real ore drifted into a corridor frequented by Thranic Imperial patrols. General Rennick's team was aboard. 3 days later, they were prisoners of the Thranic Imperium. After that, the pods came down burning. Present time. The second storm hit the survivable band and broke against its edge. Calloway felt the change through the soles of his boots before the scanner confirmed it. The killing heat eased. Not to anything a living world would call cool, but to something a sealed man in a working suit could survive. This is the edge of it, Adami said, studying the cracked scanner. Air's coming down. Still poison, but it's below the line. He lowered the unit. We're in the band. They found shelter an hour later, a lava tube opening low in a ridge of ancient rock deep enough to break the wind. Defensible if it had to be. Brant cleared it first while Adami checked the floor and walls for hidden weaknesses. Once satisfied, they dragged the salvage inside. For the first time since the drop, Calloway sat with Stone at his back and took stock. 2 water cells remained, filter cartridges for days, not weeks. 5 suits still functioning despite the abuse they had taken. A damaged scanner. 5 men, all alive. Outside, the band cycled through its brief rhythm of light and darkness. Inside, the team finally had enough shelter to think. Dovich moved down the line checking pulses and respiration. Brant recoiled the cable that had patched a gasket and hauled them through a storm. Near the mouth of the tube, Adami sat with the salvaged comms unit across his knees, studying it while he watched the sky. Hale noticed. You think that still works? I think it will, Adami said, when it needs to. Hale looked toward Calloway. The question had been building in him since the ash plain, since the mound, since the realization that Rennick's training had matched this place far too well. Sir, he said carefully, General Rennick trained us for this. What mission did he send us here to accomplish? The tube fell quiet. Brant stopped coiling the cable. Dovich looked up from his kit. Calloway rested his head against the stone and looked toward the mouth of the shelter. "There's a transport coming," he said. "Sooner or later, another ship will bring another batch of prisoners. The Empire never stops feeding Vulkaris. General Rennick didn't train us to survive here forever. He trained us to stay alive long enough for the next transport to arrive." Hale stared at him across the darkness of the tube. Calloway nodded toward the lidded sky beyond the ridge. "We are not waiting for rescue, Hale. We're waiting for the next Rennick ship. When it comes, we take it." The transport came down on the 17th day. The smuggler had spoken of patterns, of drops that came often enough to matter. Calloway had been watching the sky since the day they landed. On the 17th day, his patience paid off. A ship appeared above Vulkaris. It descended the way a verdict descends, slow and certain. The transport emerged through the ash clouds and settled toward the plain on a broad landing arc, while two escorts held station high above, silent witnesses to a sentence that had never once failed. The ship touched down less than 3 km from the ridge. Dust and ash rolled away from its landing thrusters, ramps lowered, hatches opened, prisoners began coming out. Some died immediately. The heat took them before they understood what they were breathing. Others staggered a little farther before the air found its way into damaged seals and burning lungs. A few tried to run. Vulkaris caught them all. New species, new faces. The same ending. The Thran barely watched. For them this was administration. A handful of officers stood near the transport while crew members supervised the unloading. Nobody rushed, nobody took cover. Nobody expected trouble from a world where nobody survived. "Crew," Brant asked quietly. Adjami studied the transport through the cracked scanner. "Light," he said. "Skeleton crew. Half the ship's running itself. Nobody wastes manpower on a prison drop." Calloway watched the transport for another minute, comparing what he saw against the smuggler's testimony. Then he nodded. "That's our ship." Nobody asked what he meant. The team was already moving. The assault came fast. Brant reached the transport first and went through the nearest hatch before the alarm could spread. Calloway and Dovich followed him. Adami broke for the control section while Hale covered the rear. Inside, the crew were exactly what complacency creates, a handful of Thran, running a routine they had performed for years without interruption. The first two never reached their weapons. The rest reacted quickly enough to prove they were soldiers, but not quickly enough to stop what had already begun. Brant forced the fighting into narrow corridors where numbers meant little. Calloway and Dovich cleared the aft compartments while Adami pushed toward control. A crew chief managed to draw a sidearm and put a round through Hale's thigh before Brant shot him down. Hale dropped to one knee against the bulkhead, jaw locked against the pane, and kept his rifle trained on the corridor. Dovich reached him moments later. "How bad?" Calloway asked. "Through and through," Dovich said while sealing the wound. "He'll keep." "I'm still here," Hale said. 90 seconds after the first shot, the transport belonged to the humans. 6 Thran lay dead. One human was bleeding. All 5 were still alive. "I don't need to run," Hale said, pale beneath the blood loss. "I only need a window and a rail gun." Adami did not master the ship. He Found the three things that mattered. It runs itself, he said, hands moving over imperial glyphs, matching symbols, to functions the way he'd been taught. I don't need to understand the whole ship. I need comms, a fire solution, and attitude. The automation can handle the rest. The board lit. He'd found the rail guns. Codes, Calloway said, in the buffer. Last check-in still cached. Adami's jaw tightened. The escorts expect a routine telemetry report after a drop, standard handshake. If I send the expected report clean, they read it as procedure and go back to sleep. How long does clean buy us? One report. Maybe one. He looked up. After that, nothing's clean. Two ships in orbit, Escort Alpha and Escort Beta, waiting on paperwork. Calloway looked at the firing solution Adami had built and the cached handshake beside it. Send the report, he said. Then kill Alpha. The transport clawed its way back into orbit on battered drives, broadcasting a routine telemetry report all the while. The handshake went up clean. Alpha received a routine status report from a transport completing a routine drop formatted exactly the way 4 centuries of unbroken procedure said it should be. No alarm. No concern. A system trusting a system. The railgun fired through that trust. The slug crossed the distance in a heartbeat and took Alpha amidships. Before the escort understood there was a war. Beta did not fire. It could have. It had the angle and it had the guns. But one Imperial ship had just destroyed another, and for several seconds nobody aboard Beta understood what they were looking at. The transport was broadcasting valid codes, carrying legitimate cargo, and doing something that made no sense. They hesitated. They tried to make the impossible fit inside the rules they knew. That hesitation was all the humans needed. Adami answered with the second railgun shot. It missed. Beta was moving now, alert and jinking, and the transport was a sluggish, ugly thing built to carry prisoners, not fight warships. The slug went wide into the dark. Then it was a knife fight, and the humans were holding the worst knife. Beta came around hard and opened up. The transport took the first hits along the dorsal line. Systems Adami couldn't read died in cascades, the deck heaving, a console blowing out beside Brandt. The automation that had made the ship easy now made it stubborn. It fought its own handlers, routines locking, the fire solution dropping out twice while Adami swore and rebuilt it by hand. Yusuf, Calloway said, I know. Windows closing. I know. Beta lined up for the kill, certain now. A warship against a barge, doing the thing it understood. And in being certain, it flew a clean, predictable line. But Adami had spent the fight watching Beta's attack pattern. The escort was following doctrine, and doctrine made it predictable. He aimed not at the ship, but at the point where its next maneuver would take it. The slug punched through the escort's bridge. Beta came apart. The ship folded around. The wound went dark and broke apart. Debris spreading along the orbit it had held so patiently. The transport groaned around them, half crippled, venting, holding. Vulkaris orbit was quiet. Adami found the communications link. Last. There it is, he said. The transport reports every prisoner dropped back to the Empire. That's half its job. Since we've got the ship, we've got the connection. He looked up from the console. Sector-wide broadcast. Open. Calloway looked at Hale, gray and bandaged against the bulkhead, but upright, alive. At Brant, bleeding from the console. Blast, grinning anyway. At Dovich and at Adami. And at the dead board with 2 escorts. Gone off it. Open it, he said. This is Sergeant Calloway of the Human Defense Forces broadcasting from Vulkaris. You sent us here to die. Your records will say it worked. They're wrong. We lived. We took the ship you sent to bury the next ones. We killed the escorts you left to watch. We hold this orbit now. Today. This hour. A breath. The relay carried it to every system the Empire owned. Vulkaris was your proof that resistance was hopeless. Today, that proof failed. He cut the channel. Adami left the relay open for one final transmission. It was addressed to General Aldrich Rannick. The message was short. Mission accomplished, transport secured, 2 escorts destroyed. Extraction requested. Then he sent the coordinates. Rannick had planned for this from the moment he sent the team to Vulkaris. A human task force waited under strict emission silence in a debris field 2 hours away by FTL, hidden among enough rock and metal clutter to disappear into the background noise of the system. Its orders were simple. Remain dark unless a signal came from Vulkaris. Now the signal had come. Humanity was already on the way. They didn't own Vulkaris. 5 men in a damaged ship over a worthless rock owned nothing for long. And holding the planet had never been part of the mission. The plan had been to break a thing that could not break. Out across the sector in mining camps and labor worlds and conquered systems, where the Empire's certainty had been the only law. Beings who had been told Vulkaris was the end of every argument had just heard a human voice broadcasting the impossible. The Thranic Empire would retake Vulkaris. After the humans were gone, it would never retake the silence that had existed before the broadcast. Hey there, space human. And GT, music. And GT, I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind, or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. Trust me, music, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card music here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.